Invite up our federal CIO panel, please, if you could join us at the stage. Good afternoon. I'm Melinda Balthrop, and I am the IBM Justice and Law Enforcement Account Leader. I'm also an executive in our Global Business Services. First, I'd like to thank Steve and the IGES family for putting together a wonderful symposium over the last 3 days and for the opportunity to introduce our federal CIOs panel. I think many of you know that IBM is a sustaining member at IGES, and we're also a partner in bringing together the best of government and industry in advancing the information sharing and safeguarding mission. IBM is also deeply committed to the law enforcement mission with over $18 billion invested in technologies and capabilities that support the law enforcement community, mobility, analytics, cloud. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator and distinguished panel who will talk about the major issues and challenges that face federal CIOs. I'll start with our moderator, Mr. Paul Wormerly. Mr. Wormerly is the Executive Director Emeritus of IGES and the owner of Wormerly Consulting. He's had a long career in the field of law enforcement and justice technology. He was the first National Project Director of Project Search and was appointed by the President as the Deputy Administrator of the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration at DOJ. Mr. Wormerly has been an advisor to the White House on security and privacy, and as Bob Greaves described him best yesterday, he is a strategic thinker and a visionary. Next, we have Dr. David Bray, the CIO for the Federal Communications Commission. Prior to this role, Dr. Bray was the executive for the Innovation, Integration, and Interoperability for the Office of the Program Manager Information Sharing Environment. In 2013, Dr. Bray received the National Intelligence Exceptional Achievement Medal, and the team he supervised received the National Intelligence Meritorious Unit Citation that same year. He was also one of 13 individuals across the entire federal workforce recognized for the Arthur S. Fleming Award for Public Service Leadership. We also have Dr. Richard Holgate, the Assistant Director for Science and Technology and the CIO for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. In that role, he is responsible for strategy, planning, management, and the delivery of ATF's IT and forensic services. Within the forensics portfolio, he leads ATF's financial investigative services, oversees its 3 forensic science labs and its fire research lab, and manages its ballistic imaging technology program. Dr. Holgate was also the Executive Assistant Director at the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. And last, of course, but not least, we have Ms. Donna Roy, the Executive Director of DHS's Information Sharing Environment Offices and the Program Director for DHS's Homeland Security Information Network and the National Information Exchange Model. Ms. Roy is a national leader in information sharing and access. She drives the DHS technical policy development in coordination with the White House National Security Staff and the Program Manager for the Information Sharing Environment. In 2009 and 2012, Ms. Roy was the recipient of the Federal Computer Week's Fed 100 Award for advancing data management and information sharing. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Mr. Wormerly, and our distinguished panel.
Thank you, Melinda. It's a pleasure to be back with you. This session that you're about to participate in is the highlight of what I hope you found to be a very productive and useful symposium, the first annual symposium of the IGES Institute. I hope to see many more. But this particular session is not just going to be a bunch of talking heads up here. We're going to insist that you participate and ask hard questions of the panelists. They're here to be open with you and talk about our joint interests and concerns about how to move forward with information sharing. And they're all people who have had experience in doing so and are eager to talk with you about how you can help and how we can work together in these issues. I have a few questions which I'll ask them to get started with, but then I'm going to turn to you all and as I want to follow Shemendra's lead, if nobody speaks up, I'll call you out, so be prepared for this. I have to add one note about Donna Roy that some of you may not know, but this job of being a CIO or in the CIO's office in the federal government is a very difficult task these days. You heard Doug Robinson talk about the average tenure of state CIOs being 26 months. There's a lot of movement at the federal CIO level too, in and out of offices, and it takes somebody would be pretty tenacious and persistent and capable to last very long. And Donna has been at the Department of Homeland Security for 7 years, and I attribute this to the fact that Donna came to this job from the Marine Corps, and she knows how to take the hill. So this is what it takes. And the other two people on our panel are PhDs. I'm sure you noticed that, and they didn't come to this job lightly. They know something about what it takes to do this job. So I've asked them to think about a couple of questions that I'm going to ask each of them to speak a little bit about these questions, and then we're going to hopefully hear from you. But the first one I thought that might help get us started in this is to ask each panelist to tell us today, what are the 2 or 3 major challenges facing you in your focus on supporting the mission of your agency as the CIO? And let's just go down the table and give you a chance to react to that. David?
All right. Well, first I want to thank you, Paul, and thank you, IJIS, for having me. So the Federal Communications Commission, I've been there for about 5 months now, and we've been around since 1934. So we have quite a bit of legacy systems. So our number one challenge is we have, even though we're only about 1,750 people, we have 200 systems. I jokingly say it's kind of like Oprah Winfrey. A system for you, a system for you, everybody gets a system. More than 40% of them are more than 10 years old. We're talking Power Builder and even other more interesting legacy software development. So taking those different systems, which often have the code commingled with the data, commingled with the user interface, and moving towards a much more modern architecture, ideally going straight to platform as a service. That's our number one challenge. Second challenge builds on that. Right now, I do not have an easy way to look across the entire enterprise data of the FCC, despite the fact that we may want to track licenses. We have 70 different systems that do licenses. There's no easy way to actually say, show me everything that's associated with David Bray or associated with this company. And so looking at a data mart, we've had Jeff Jonas come in, and that's sort of the idea of going to the cloud and doing sort of a similar sort of card catalog that then points to that legacy data at the same time as moving to platform as a service. And then the third is secure mobility. We are the FCC, so we should be leading the way in that space. We do have some interesting things going on where we're going to go to virtual desktop come April, where your FCC desktop will show up on your iPad or iPhone or whatever device, and that actually will allow us to bring your own device to work. But even then, there's other challenges where at the FCC we actually do build custom cars that do enforcement for rogue signals and bringing in secure mobility into those cars. Other challenges too in terms of people in the field and maybe potentially austere environments, making sure we can do that and actually provide them wherever they need the ability to do their work. So that's it.
I hope you get time to take a vacation. Rick?
Well, thanks, Paul. And just to elaborate a little bit on what David said, we're not quite as small as the FCC, but not that much larger either. So ATF is a law enforcement and regulatory organization of about 5,000 employees. And we've had the good fortune over the last several years, and thanks to the good work of some of my predecessors, to do some innovative things with technology in support of our mission. Some of the challenges that we face today is, one, finding the means to continue to innovate. Certainly some of that is a result of what I will call a pause that we took during FY13, thanks to sequestration and some other fiscal pressures we were under, where we kind of retrenched and took a very cautious approach to new investments and so forth. And so now we need to kind of re-energize ourselves in terms of moving forward with new innovative capabilities and investments to support our mission. And some of that is also just some of the discipline that we need to undertake as an IT organization to look at where are we spending internal resources today where maybe we can economize and free up some internal resources and redirect some of those resources into more innovative areas. So certainly looking at reducing expenditures in commodity IT services, and really following some of the federal CIO's guidance under the umbrella of portfolio stat and being a little bit more disciplined in the way we think about our IT portfolio. And that includes looking for opportunities to move to shared services. We've done a lot of work over the last year or two with the Department of Justice in exploring opportunities for shared services in everything from mobility and mobile device management to now we're looking at shared services for email, which again aren't terribly daunting prospects. A lot of other departments have already pursued some of those opportunities, but it's a cultural adjustment for us in DOJ. But we're thanks to some fiscal pressures and I think all the pressures we're feeling as components, we're much more inclined now to pursue some of those collective opportunities. And then some of the opportunity to innovate is also finding the right mission partners to help drive the innovation as well. So when we've been successful in innovating in the past in areas like mobility and elsewhere, we've had the good fortune of having some very creative thinkers on the mission side to help drive some of those ideas and some of those successes. And so continuing to find those sources of innovation in the organization is also important. The second challenge I would mention is really evolving our thinking in the way we buy and build solutions. So a lot of our partner law enforcement agencies, whether it's DEA or FBI or ICE or CIS, have moved very aggressively to adopt agile development. That's something that frankly we've been relatively slow to adopt, and we recognize that we need to move more in that direction. We need to be smarter about the way we approach building solutions and systems, not waiting a couple of years to deliver a product, but being much more incremental, iterative, agile in the way we deliver those kinds of services. And incorporating things like cloud services into that mindset as well. So wherever we can leverage things like platform as a service, making sure we take advantage of those opportunities. And then lastly, the third challenge I'll mention is frankly refreshing our workforce. For a long time as an organization, we've relied on industry partners to deliver IT services. We've been very much an outsourced IT organization. And that comes with positives and negatives, and we're at the point now where we've probably moved too far in that direction, and we need to bring some of that expertise, some of that capability back in-house so that we have more institutional knowledge as a organic organization as opposed to relying quite so much on external service providers and industry partners.
Thank you, Rick. Donna?
I want to thank you, Mr. Wormalley, for that extra add-on to the intro. And also want to thank you for allowing me to speak here. On behalf of Luke McCormick, who couldn't be here, I will say that DHS has several challenges in the IT world. I think the first one is really smoothing out the use of commodity IT and getting off of some of those legacy system infrastructures. And when you look at what we're doing there, it is taking the 12 or so cloud computing services we've got in our deck today and really looking at how do you develop a next generation computing environment where we are out of the business of providing the data center and in the business of managing the services through the right providers. And that certainly is a challenge on the acquisition side. It's a challenge on the personnel side. The people we have today might not be the people we need 3 years from now when we move to more service level management, contract management capabilities. And so next generation computing is certainly a thrust for us at the department for the next couple of years. The second challenge I really think is around enabling our mobile workforce. Whether we want to address this or not, our workforce is mobile. I have a couple of people in my office who specifically are doing some of the biggest things in the department. I never know where they are. It frustrates me a little. I'm an old school manager. I like to walk into someone's office and know where they are and what they're doing, and can I bump into them and have that hallway conversation. And now I have to figure out how to do that differently. We also have to figure out how to do that in a way that supports a 24/7 access to information, protects our information, works in this cyber environment, allows the use of a PIV credential on a BlackBerry, right? I mean, these things don't work yet, and yet our workers are working in a mobile environment. So they're not going to not be mobile anymore. And so catching up with the mobile environment are really sort of on the forefront of our whole executive team. We've got a couple of things going on there. So we have a workplace as a service concept. You show up as an employee and you get issued, the thing you need, right? The thing you need may be a tablet. The thing you may need just a VDI, a computer with geez, let's go back to the green screens, right? So a very thin computer with some access to the mothership and the back so that you have the same computing environment wherever you go. So this workplace as a service is going to mature, right? We should allow employees to work how they want to work and how they do work. And they work 24/7, whether we want them to or not these days. And they work in their car, on the train, after soccer practice. This is where they work, right? So allowing them to work in a secure environment, is a challenge. Keeping up with them is a challenge. There's a lot of the third plug issues or the fourth plug issues around interoperability in that space, right? How do you get end-to-end interoperability a safe way? The one that's on my mind most is how do we put in place the right mechanisms now to leverage the data that we've got for mission improvement? So the big data issues, how do you sort of get that done faster, cheaper, better, but in a way that allows us to build a capacity over time. I think I'm on record for saying I'd like to steal the 40 or so data scientists away from Facebook, who are constantly modeling my happiness while I'm online, and apply that talent to constantly find the unhappiness and the countering violent extremism problem of the world, right? It's an interesting social conundrum that we've got our best talent working on our least compelling problems in this country, I think. And really, the big issue around big data is not that we don't have products out there. It's not that we don't have data. It's that we don't yet have the data scientists working on some of the more compelling issues, and we need to grow that staff, right? So that's really access to the best talent in the right mission space is a concern of mine. And then I think I was just going to add a fourth one because I can. I'm the last panel. I am a Marine, and if you try to stop me, it's just not going to work. Is for the ISC specifically, and this is where I spend most of my time, which is we're at a point now where we have a considerable amount of standards and ways of doing business, supported by architectures, supported by the community. HISN as an example. I'm putting out on production a capability that we're trying to embody the goodness of the information sharing environment, SAML, GFIPM, NEAM, sort of all the standards. So what we really need for the ISC are recipes for how to make all of that work to solve a business problem. Those recipes will come in the form of a common profile or some standards geek language. But we just need recipes or a cookbook, a recipe book. I do this and this and this and this. Hence interoperability. And we're working on those types of things in the White House's subcommittee for information interoperability. So those are sort of our biggest challenges right now.
Thank you. Thank you all. As Donna mentioned, and several of you implied, that one of the challenges CIOs face, and I think in the federal government perhaps even more than other government levels, is this fast changing pace of technology and the fact that the digital natives among us are now entering the workforces in quantities. I heard a presentation by a young man from NASA recently who said that 26% of the employees in NASA are under 30 and are true digital natives growing up digital. And of course, there's this demand for technologies, and we've seen this incredible pace of change as reflected in the fact that I heard this from the CEO of Hewlett-Packard not too long ago, the year before last, that 90% of what they sold wasn't on the price list at the beginning of the year. You just think about that rapid pace of change, and I really love to hear you all talk about what are the technologies that you're thinking about making a part of the enterprise system, and what are the challenges in doing so?
So that's a great point about the pace of change, and it's often a challenge to keep up when you're in an environment in which some of the things you do are described by law, and as we all see and know, law does not change necessarily at the same pace as technology change. But yes, so the first one would actually be, and then I'm actually struck by what we've all said is mobile. This is the year, 2014, is when 2 billion mobile devices will be shipped. 1/3 of those will be to completely new users that have never used a smartphone before. This will also be the year in which there are more mobile devices on the planet than humans. And in 3 years, there will be twice as many mobile devices on the planet than humans. And so things are very quickly shifting away from having desktop PCs, and that's going to be a huge game changer for government. And so I'm quite interested in what can I do to have a secure kernel. Citrix and VMware have offerings there. Also, what can I do for app development? We did launch about 2.5 months ago a voluntary app from the FCC. You can download the source code so you can make sure it's got no backdoors. And basically, with that, people can voluntarily install that on their Android device. The iOS will be coming out soon. And it will actually 3 times a day connect your broadband connection speed, and then report that to a third party that then shares that data with the FCC, and we can actually produce the first crowdsourced map of broadband connection speeds by provider across the United States. Now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I can imagine things that the ATF, DHS, other agencies could do. It would be nice if we actually are collaborating on how we're doing our app development as opposed to each going and trying our own little forays. And so that, to me, is the first technology. Building on that, then, is the idea that we do need a stack of tools to do data marts, to do predictive analysis. Because now we're going to have this huge amount of data coming in, whether it's coming in from citizen-led efforts where they're actually sharing their data, or it's coming in from public-private partnerships where we're sharing data. How do we make sense of that, and how does that help us do our jobs better? And then finally, to actually do all of this, we clearly need to modernize our architecture. So actually, platform as a service going beyond there. How can we do open data? How can we modernize? And at the same time, can we actually get into offerings with vendors where they're actually doing a service level agreement to actually help with the protection and the security of the data, not just us?
Good.
Thanks.
Rick?
Yeah, and just to echo some of the thoughts about the pace of change of technology, it's remarkable, particularly when you talk about the mobility space, the rate at which things go from being newly available on the market to something we think of as now a commodity service. And the rate at which that's happening is incredibly fast. So, a couple of years ago, we were all struggling with, how do I think about managing non-traditional mobile devices, consumer mobile devices, that sort of thing. And we had no idea how to do that. We had no idea what the tools were that were available to do that. We hadn't really heard of anything called mobile device management. And now suddenly, mobile device management is frankly a commodity service, right? I mean, you see a lot of departments and agencies putting out, solicitations for department-wide services for mobile device management, which, is something we didn't even know existed about 3 or 4 years ago. So that kind of rapid rate of change is really remarkable, and requires a lot of agility on our part in terms of recognizing some of these things that today may be emerging and new and that sort of thing, but in the next couple of years will be something that we don't want to actually manage or maintain as an individual organization. We want to leverage the ability to share those services, share those capabilities across organizations. So from our perspective, some of the things that we've done and some of the technology we're looking to continue to leverage, cloud technology. So, for us, that was a little bit intimidating because, we're a law enforcement organization. We're part of the Department of Justice, and moving information into, and I'm talking about commercial cloud technology, not government proprietary cloud technology or on-premise cloud technology. That was a fairly interesting undertaking in terms of understanding the services that are available, the terms and conditions, how we can influence those terms and conditions or how we cannot influence those terms and conditions to get us to a point of comfort with that technology and with those services such that we can leverage them for the data that we consider to be fairly sensitive. And we've gotten to that point now with email at least. But there's huge additional potential there with regard to all the other platform as a service offerings out there, whether it's things like Salesforce, and we've had some conversations with CBP, Customs and Border Protection, about leveraging some of those kinds of platforms. So huge potential there just to lower the barrier of adoption of technology, but also delivering better capabilities for mission execution. The other area of technology I'd say we're very excited about and is very promising is converging networks on IP-based networks. And that's kind of an old story at this point when it comes to voice and video and a variety of other things. We now do our surveillance video over IP-based networks, but now we're looking at, and David is certainly more familiar with this than I am, looking at things like radio. Do we still need separate networks for what we now think of as radio voice communications? And through things like FirstNet and some other initiatives, huge promise there to converge a lot more of that infrastructure onto a much more manageable set of networks. And then last but not least, echoing some of the thoughts about mobility, for mission enhancement, looking at all the next generation of mobile capability that's now emerging and that we need to look at adopting, whether it's near-field communications or the use of peripherals on mobile devices. Certainly when you start talking about collecting biometrics in the field and some of those kinds of things, being able to use an existing mobile device with a peripheral attachment to do some of that data collection makes everyone's life a lot simpler. They have to carry around less things. There are fewer devices to manage and fewer things to worry about losing. Things like being smarter about how we do credentials on mobile devices, whether it's derived credentials or so forth, as Donna mentioned. And yes, and certainly application development as well. And that's one of those areas where we've recognized there are some opportunities for sharing. So within DOJ, we've got a shared application development environment. We're looking to leverage some of the work that DHS is doing with regard to application testing and evaluation through their mobile car wash. So again, looking for those opportunities to adopt, wherever possible, commodity-type services that we can share so that we can focus more and more on the innovative delivery of mission-supporting services.
Great. Donna?
I was going to introduce the mobile car wash.
Sorry.
So I think that I'm happy that the world is changing faster and faster. It keeps me younger to have to deal with the amount of devices and the sort of the technology as it's moving, and I feel like I'm needing to be younger more lately. So I think that there's a couple of things. I think we need to stop worrying about devices and hope that the industry moves as fast as possible to get the interoperability standards for us, right? We shouldn't care about what the device is. We should care about what the device works and how it works, right? And so in that context, DHS is investing less in devices and much more in how do we create a mechanism for writing code once and distributing across multiple devices. How do you create that code once and ensure that it's 508 compliant, that it has the right security hooks, and that when you got it right, you can share it, right? And that is the definition of the mobile car wash, the car wash, right? So the car wash really is a code sharing, code checking, good practice capability that allows you to write it once and distribute it to an Android, an iPhone, or whatever else is going to come out next. If you don't know about the car wash, see me later if I'm not running out of here, or send me an email or do an internet search for it. I think you'll find it. So the mobile car wash is a good investment in sort of moving us forward, right? Device agnostic, we really need to mean that and stop worrying about the devices. And the second thing is the Internet of Things scares the crap out of me at home, so it should be scaring the crap out of you at work. I took some time during my 3-week vacation in October to refresh the technology in my house. I got rid of all the old stuff, all new computers, new routers, new cable, new modems, everything. And I checked into the router, and first I think I needed to go to school just to set the router up. It was very complicated. And I had it set up, and then all of a sudden I realized I had 20 things in my house. There's 2 people that live in our house. 20 things connecting to that router. Yeah, it was like the Internet of Things in my house is prolific, never mind the Internet of Things out there. So the department's strategy on that really is moving from perimeter security to continuous diagnostics and monitoring of the network of things, right? We can't control the explosion of the things, so realize the things are going to explode. But find a way to monitor them and detect them differently, right? Change the game. So there's a big focus in DHS internally and in DHS as its cyber role for the department to proliferate continuous diagnostics and monitoring approaches to move us forward and security approaches as the Internet of Things explodes. Right? If I can't figure out how to set up my router now to keep my neighbor off of my network, imagine what we're struggling with at the federal IT level.
Thank you. That's really a good point. I think the Internet of Things is just its infancy in terms of the kinds of ways in which we can find ourselves crippled by the attacks that might happen because of all those refrigerators programmed to cook eggs for you in the morning or whatever. I have one final question for our distinguished panelists, after which I'm turning it over to you all, so get ready. But I can't help but ask this. I know you all have strong experiences, and being good forward-thinking people, you're all going to have some thoughts about this. But during the past year or two, we have seen over and over again and recently some just horrendous breaches of security in the commercial world. We've seen disclosures of government system data that have the potential for shaping, even in Congress, the laws that are passed about what we are able to even do with our computer systems, let alone how much effort we should go to provide the safeguarding called for in the President's strategy of information sharing and safeguarding. So is there I'm going to ask this maybe indelicately, and I don't mean to totally pin you down on this, and I'm just hoping you'll share some thoughts. Is there a post-Snowden era that is going to have an impact on what we can do with our information sharing and what we must do to prevent or to better safeguard it? What's that impact going to be for us all? David?
All right. Well, that's a whopper of a question, Paul, and I'll do my best to try and share my own personal views of what I'm seeing, which is first, sort of building on what Donna was saying about the Internet of Things. We really need to bake in security and privacy by design into what we're doing, and that's actually recognizing that security and privacy are both. You shouldn't see them as an either or, and I think there's several of us here today that have said that same thing. So that when we are writing code for the Internet of Things and we're writing code for networks, we have that sort of baked in. And on top of that, then that can actually feed into continuous monitoring in the sense that the system could actually let you know if there's been a breach of privacy or if there's been a breach of security. And that'll actually be the only way we can actually manage going into this future of Internet of Things, because there's not going to be enough humans to pay attention. We have to start thinking about how do we do that at the code level. It's not something we bolt on after the fact where it's like, okay, well now we need to make sure we protect security and privacy. We do that at the code level, and I think that's going to take some serious culture change, but that's the first step. With that, one of the things that we're trying to do at the FCC is I have the privilege of working with an environment that's about 60% lawyers, and so when you sit down and ask them what they want, they often just say they just want magic to happen. And part of what we try to do is walk them through the process of let's storyboard, let's actually walk out what you want to do just as simple pictures. And in there, we can actually then figure out where we can protect privacy, where we can protect security in that workflow. And then we can actually engage our contractors or engage the industry to say, what solutions do you have based on these storyboards where we can do that? That's a bit of a shift to think about, that you actually start at the non-IT level thinking about security and IT before you actually go forth and actually try to build the system.
Yeah, and I think David did a great job framing the issue, and I would echo some of his thoughts about, frankly, what Donna mentioned in terms of, this notion of continuous diagnostics and monitoring being critical to, not just the Internet of Things, but the people connected to the Internet too, because we've certainly experienced, and as many other organizations have, our own users represent a threat, either intentional or unintentional. They are a threat in terms of what they do on our network that could potentially compromise information. And again, they may be doing it intentionally, they may be doing it unintentionally, but clearly we can't lock everything down to a point where there's no permissible, potentially problematic behavior, because then you also can't get your job done. So we need to be a little bit smarter about the way in which we think about detecting potentially problematic behavior that's occurring on our network, and in such a way that we can respond to it and act accordingly. I think part of that also, and David alluded to this, is being smarter about data management as well, and that includes things like tagging data and using techniques like data rights management and other types of capabilities, so that it's not an all or nothing proposition that a user or an individual or an adversary doesn't have access to everything or nothing, but there's a granularity there that we have a little bit better ability to enforce. So yes, I think we're definitely going to see changes in this era of having seen what the risk is out there. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to solve some of those problems through creative solutions as opposed to any sort of reactionary mandate that handcuffs us in terms of what we're able to do or what we're forced to do. But I think yes, we'll definitely see some changes.
Anna?
I don't have too much to add to this, but Snowden certainly did show us that there are still areas, that are vulnerable, continuing our cyber response is going to require us to be on our toes. Certainly, Snowden was among a privileged set of users who had access to potentially more than he needed, or had access to information that was broader maybe than it should have been, right? And so I'm sure the White House is looking at this, and there'll be additional policies got handed down to handle these types of situations. But I do agree that it is about ensuring that if it does happen, or maybe when, I'm not sure, that we understand that it is happening, that we can catch it, trap it, mitigate it, and much more intervene it, right? And so the concept on continuous diagnostics is figuring out how to stop it before it gets proliferated. So a little bit of kill chain, right? So if you stop it here, it doesn't sort of go all the way. And so understanding that the continuous diagnostics monitoring approaches really are on finding all the devices, understanding that network security is more than just a perimeter problem. It's an understanding of where information goes, who sees it, how often they see it, when they should see it, and a lot of information on what's appropriate.
Thank you. All right, it's your turn. Do you have questions for these people, Mark?
Should I shout?
Yeah.
First of all, Dr. Bray, I'm now a card-carrying speed test user.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I must commend your legal team that has been created. The terms of use are very nicely read and understandable, so it couldn't have been a lawyer.
We're trying to go for simplicity, so I'll make sure I share the praise back with them. So.
Really, really great discussion, particularly on how at a position you're dealing with the pace of technology shift and how you react to it. I have two questions. They may be ignorant. They may be relevant. Well, first, what I'd like to know is what is your experience as you work for this technology shift and to create efficiencies with new capabilities? How tough is it to change policy? Because often I find that policy is written with a degree of uncertainty, and as you prove change, that tends to be a challenge area. The second question is somewhat related to this last set of questions. As you begin integrating more and more information in the big data environment, both internally and externally to your organization, how do you envision dealing with privacy and security by derivation, by the derivative? Because I believe that that's an area that we probably don't know as much about as we should, but it's happening.
Right. Those are those are great questions. And so the first question, just repeat back, was, what challenges we find with policy being written and then having to implement the IT? And actually, I think this is a big issue that needs to be really sort of brought to the forefront, that policymakers need to involve IT early and often when they are writing what they eventually want to do. Because often they don't know the art of the possible, and they may eventually write a policy that actually locks you into a very complicated, less than optimal path, and then say, okay, I want X by Y date. Well, just by saying X by Y date, you've just removed the ability of doing anything agile, because you're now locked into it actually has to be a requirements-driven approach. And then two, it may not be the best, most cost-effective or timely solution. And so really what we need to do is early as often try to embed IT into the policy discussion as to what's possible. I also have the inverse challenge, though, in that actually several of my systems are actually defined by law, and their uptake is defined by law, and actually what data they can and cannot collect is defined by law. And so any attempt to change even just the user interface literally requires an act of Congress. And so that's why at least I'm trying to focus on the data behind the scenes, which gets to your second question about how can at least deal with security and privacy that's inherited versus initially defined at the agency level. And with that, we'd like to be able to receive some sort of pedigree if it's received from another agency, if it's received from another partner. We do work very closely with private industry, or if it's received by the public. That pedigree actually comes with what can and cannot be done with that data, or at least a flag that says, before you do anything with this, make sure you make a call to whoever it originated from. And that's at the data level. But yes, I do find, and I would love to actually have a bigger discussion about policy is not keeping up with the pace of IT. So, thanks.
And I would say we share some of the same experiences. We've had the unfortunate circumstance of policies that we're trying to prevent one thing from happening, but inadvertently caused constraints in the way that we can implement things technologically, such that it makes our mission less efficient or less effective. And so, working around some of those issues is an interesting exercise in terms of trying to either get the policymakers, in some cases external parties who influence policy, to think differently about some of their concerns, so that we can build better capabilities to execute our mission in an efficient fashion. The second question you asked about, kind of derived information from a privacy and security perspective, frankly, that's not something we have explicitly dealt with or addressed, but it is certainly something that I think we all need to understand. And I think it will probably be of an increasing level of concern, just given some of the conversations about Snowden and what NSA has done and what you can infer from some of that information that has been collected, potentially in different pockets, but when assembled can create a much more elaborate picture of an individual or an organization or whatever. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work that remains to be done in that area.
I think the only thing I can offer on trying to have policy keep the pace of technology is just to hug all of your policy people and give them an iPad or something. Because I think it's a tension that's going to happen, for the life of IT. Policy guys work a little slower than the IT can keep up with, and there's a natural tension there that we should respect and just keep trying to drive change at the right pace. On the big data issue regarding derived data, this is a problem I worry about most. And in the department, we're starting to pilot and prototype approaches to handle the data privacy policy framework around derived data. So in our big data strategies, we certainly have been pretty thoughtful about commingling data, as an example. So we have an approach that says if you commingle data, you need to not just put rules around who accesses each piece of that commingled data, but as it's connected and as new things are made, you need to also put rules around who accesses those new things that are made. And so it's complicated. It certainly is not easy. It won't be easy to implement at machine time, but we're thinking through it now. We've got some interesting pilots and prototypes that are looking at those things, implementing some of the intelligence community standards for doing these approaches. So it's complicated, but we are starting to address them and starting to learn. If you have access to data set A and data set B, and then someone else is making connections to data set C, should you see those connections at all? Or should you be aware of them even though you only have access to two, right? Those are the types of things that we're trying to understand, how to handle the derived information and the access to the derived information. I see it as new information, and it requires new policy and new access rules around it. And I think that's consistent with how our privacy people are seeing it, so that's a good thing.
That's cool. I'm reminded of the wise man who said if it was easy, somebody would already have done it.
So I have one warning and one question. The warning is I heard about Agile from at least two of you kind of blindly, and particular, the implication that that agile, and what's this for? that agile and requirements-driven are somehow contrasted approaches. So I assume all of your RFPs just say, send us software. That was a joke, but anyway. I mean, I assume there's still some requirements generation going on, and so I would be careful in saying that we're using an agile approach, not requirements-driven. But the question is more around security. All of you said something like security needs to be baked, security and privacy need to be baked in, designed in, and everybody's been saying that since the early 14th century. Myself included, by the way. So how are we going to actually make that happen? Do you have it in your RFPs? When you bought that router at home, Donna, did you make sure that it met all the security requirements?
No, I bought the cheapest one I could find.
Exactly.
And I think it was Huawei.
As did I, by the way. So how are we going to make that transition? It's not obvious to me, and it hasn't been since I entered the industry in the early 14th century.
So we're going to go out of order because I'm tired
can
of
go
being
backwards.
last. I would say that the good news is that my federal government job doesn't inhibit me at home from buying anything I want, right? So I bought the router that fit my needs. Turns out I bought one that's way too complex for me, and I needed to download the manual and read it 10 times. But at the federal level, we're doing things a little differently, right? So standards-based acquisition is a good thing. Baking in how you should develop these things into how you're buying them just sort of makes sense, right? It's why we have enterprise architecture, and that's why standards are part of the architecture, and these recipe cookbooks for how you're rolling it out. You must have it this way into your acquisition process is the only way to ensure compliance. We are doing, or some of that right now.
So there are some requirements.
There are requirements. So you didn't talk to me, I didn't talk about Agile because I actually have mixed opinions on Agile. And would probably just bash it, and that's never really good, right? Public forum. But I would say that in the Department of Homeland Security, as an example, and we could do better, but we've had for long, since I remember, architectural language and standards language on all of our acquisitions, at least all of our major contracts. So we must comply with the enterprise architecture and the standards, blah, 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 right? The hard part of that is ensuring it's done. And so, there are compliance activities around checking that. We're needing, though, to do that in a bigger, broader way, and so the information sharing environments work with ISA IPC and the national strategy around standards-based acquisition and ensuring that it's not just DHS's programs that are saying these have to be bought by standards, but it's the whole of government. It's the GSA cloud services, right? I want to take some of my stuff to the cloud. Well, the cloud doesn't report to the federal government if they are, the real public crowd. And so understanding how getting GSA to build services that are standards-based, how we roll that across the whole of government in a consistent manner is no small deal. But Mr. Paul said he could get it done in FY15. So.
We're moving.
So yeah, it is the trick of it, right? You can put a bunch of standards out there, pick one, pick 10. It doesn't ensure interoperability. You can tell someone to use 3 standards or 1 standard and 10 people to do 1 standard. You will get 10 different implementations of a standard, so you need recipes on how to do that. And then ensuring when people buy things that it meets these standards. Boy, that's the holy grail. The issue around privacy, security, and baking that in is that there are relatively few commercial implementations where you see that that's baked into the product. And so I think that, let me just make a prediction, 2014 and 2015 are going to be the years of you'll see the federal government actually becoming the source of innovation and the source of drivers for these technologies. I think that, so if you read the press, my department's the worst agency to work for. If you dig in a little further, I work in an office that's in the lowest quadrant of the worst government agency to work for. So I should hate my job. It should be lackluster, no innovation, no smart talent. I mean, if you read the numbers, right, I got depressed for about 5 minutes. And then I looked around, and looking at what we're doing, we are innovating. We're innovating faster, I think, than what industry is in some areas. And I do think that regardless of what you read, so don't read that stuff or read it lightly, right? Regardless of what you read, the people that are sticking around in IT, in the federal government, boy, they're going to start kicking butt. And you're going to start seeing the federal government as a source of innovation as opposed to keeping up with innovation.
That's really great and refreshing to hear. We're nearing the end of our...
We actually have two more responses.
Okay.
You go first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I answered for all of them. No.
Go ahead.
I want to actually build on what Donna is saying, which and actually she's being a true Marine. You know, we stick in when times get tough, and I think that is true about if you look at anyone who's actually opting to stay, given the hopefully sequestration will soon be lifted. They're truly believers. But that said, two thoughts. One on baking in security and privacy by design. I really do think it happens at the code level, and so building on what you said, yes, we should gather requirements. My challenge often is when I've had some bureau chiefs come and say, I did this agile process, but it ended up costing me more money or it went longer. And so it's a question of, it's really a choice. Do you want to have it by such and such date or within this such amount of money, or do you want to be able to change your requirements in midstream? I'm giving you that choice, but you can't have all three. And so that's a big challenge is when they think they can actually have agile, but then also guarantee by X date they get everything they want. And so when we're doing code development, what we're trying to do is if we can actually storyboard what the actual behavior of the code should be, then we can actually define what it shouldn't be, and then that actually can send off alerts that automatically go to the security folks. And I'm actually merging my network and security folks to work together because you don't know if what's going off is the server went down, or there's a software bug, or someone's actually trying to do a data exfil, or someone's trying to ingest something they shouldn't be. That same alert that should be at the code level is a way of baking in security and privacy by design that then gets people to pay attention to it and say what's going on. And that's at least our initial pioneering efforts to try and actually bake it in by design.
Rick, do you have anything to add? Okay. I want to give the panel one final chance to make a closing comment before we're running out of time. And the question I have, which I'd like to hear you speak to just as a final statement here, is you've got a lot of people from industry still in the room, and the people that are here are quite serious about this field. So what is it that industry can do to help you achieve your objectives in the coming year or two?
Stop stealing my people.
Or send us your people
Or
and
send
let them
us
do
your
a
people.
rotation.
Just kidding. I think it is pay attention to, not really, just kidding, just saying. I would say that it is about embracing, standards, embracing new ways of doing business, but continuing these partnerships. I always look forward to meeting in venues like this where we can talk about our requirements and what you've got on deck. I would say that if you're going to come to me, one-on-one, please try to sort of understand what we're doing and understand our challenges. It's not that I don't want to talk to everyone who's got this new nifty product, as an example. I have limited bandwidth, and I want to know how that fits into this overall piece that I'm trying to fix. And so understanding what we're trying to do, as an example, with continuous diagnostics and monitoring. Invest in understanding what we're trying to do there so that we can have forge a path forward.
If I can actually take off the inside hat and put on the outside hat of a CIO, one thing that I would be very interested in the years to come is when you turn on your water, you're not wondering whether or not you need to put additional filters or things on that water supply, at least in the United States, that you can trust what's coming out of there and it's drinkable.
Might be in West Virginia.
Yeah, except in West Virginia. So.
That's the point. Because when we connect to the internet, it's inherently vulnerable. Why can't I turn to a provider and actually say, I want to trust that what's coming through that pipe and what I'm sending back through it, I can trust, for the most part, like the water supply. So that's a broader question that's not just to internal IT within our different agencies. It's a question of where do we do security? Are we all going to do defense in depth within our own organizations, or do we need to start looking about that this really is a public service, public utility, and how can we actually trust it much like we do trust the power supply, the water supply, for the most part?
Interesting. Rick?
Yeah, and just to build a little bit on what Donna said, I think one of the important benefits that I gain from interaction with industry is just learning about successful solutions, best practices, things that have worked elsewhere. Because frankly, we don't always talk to each other within government and understand what each other is doing, but sometimes you have better visibility into those things that may apply to us, that we can learn from, that we can benefit from. Again, within the context of what we do as an organization, as Donna said. So, making sure that what you come to us with is relevant and, it has meaning within the context of our mission and some of the initiatives that we're undertaking. But, being able to enlighten us about things that are going on elsewhere in government, things that we can reuse, that we can benefit from, that we can share, that's an incredibly important aspect of what I get out of interactions with industry.
Well, I think all of us in the room are very, very sure that this kind of dialogue is worthwhile, and we want it to continue, and we appreciate the time that you all have taken to join us today. Could we thank our panelists for... Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to our august Executive Director for any closing remarks he wants to make. Steve?